We are now through 6 weeks of the season, and there are some key players who are rising up the fantasy rankings. And you want to try and acquire these guys before your fantasy playoffs, whether it's on the waiver wire or through some trades. So here are the guys who are skyrocketing up the rankings before week 7. And we can start with the rookie in the Rams backfield, who, look, he's moving up the ranks not because of his play or anything, but because of the injuries ahead of him on the depth chart. As you can see right here from Jeff Mueller, Kyren Williams had an ankle injury. And if you look at the video, Jeff Mueller actually said, look, this could be a high ankle, but it is hard to tell. You can watch the video and you can see for yourself, but he's not going to be playing in week 7, and there's mixed feelings on if he'll even take the field before their week 10 bye. And then backup Ronnie Rivers is expected to miss at least a month with his own knee injury, meaning that Zach Evans is the next man up, most likely. Now, here's what you need to know about Evans. These are his college stats. In his final year, he transferred to Ole Miss from TCU, and he goes for over 1,100 yards as sort of the workhorse on this team after having to split a backfield in TCU his first 2 years of college. Now, I will point out that he's pretty one-dimensional. If you look at his receptions right here, he only ended up having 30 total catches through 27 career college games, so barely 1 reception per game. This is not something we could rely on him seeing like a Kyren Williams had entering the NFL. And also, Kyren Williams, an elite pass protector, not really Zach Evans' game, so there could be another running back involved. And you would expect another running back to be involved, as most running back backfields are 2-back committees, and Kyren Williams was kind of seeing this special role because he could also pass protect and pass catch. But as you can see here, they signed Royce Freeman to the active roster. Okay, well, he was already behind Zach Evans on the depth chart. Evans was active last week and Royce Freeman was not. They re-signed off the couch, basically in the street, Darrell Henderson, who has some familiarity with this offense, and Sean McVay, but he wasn't with any training camps this summer, which kind of speaks to where his game's at. And then they signed Myles Gaskin to the practice squad, which is just basically replacing the guys who were already on the practice squad in a Royce Freeman. All that to say, I believe Zach Evans is going to get the first crack as a 6th-round rookie here, but I'm not shocked if Royce Freeman is factored in a decent amount, and if Darrell Henderson is active for this game off the practice squad, if he sees some touches. Because if you followed the training camp news at all in this backfield, it was pretty clear that Zach Evans was not the greatest for some reasons, maybe off the field issues, maybe it was just how he was gelling with Sean McVay and the offensive scheme. That's why he lost the job to an undrafted 2022 player in Ronnie Rivers. Now, it sounds like I'm being pretty negative here, but again, this is a 6th-round rookie, the 3rd-string guy who's getting brought up now to see a shot with some other veterans inching down his back. But for right now, he has to move up the rankings the next few weeks because he should get the first crack. So at this point in the season, I think that Zach Evans is a pretty clear priority add if he's still in your waiver wire. And then there's Kenneth Walker, who has to be moving up the rankings because some people didn't know what to do with him when they drafted Zach Charbonnet. He fell at times to the 5th round of fantasy drafts, and right now he's one of the best players in all of fantasy football. Walker came out of the bye week and ended up seeing a season high in usage. So sometimes after the bye week, we saw rookies see more work. That did not happen with Zach Charbonnet in this backfield. It was the complete opposite. Walker, 76% of the snaps, season high. 86% of the rush attempts, season high. This led to 22 total touches in this game. And so far this season, he's been quietly more efficient. The knock on him was that he was a boomer bust runner last year. This year, a lot more efficient. As you can see right here, he ranks 22nd in yards per touch, averaging 4.7 yards per touch, continues to be very evasive, top 10 in juke rate, 5th most broken tackles. When you look at his receiving ability, he's also top 10 in running back receiving efficiency as well. So he ranks among the league best in terms of what his role is and his production this year, and now he's in the best spot on the entire week entering week 7. Because this week, Kenneth Walker is a home favorite, 7.5 points, 8 points, depending on the sports book that you're looking at, against the Arizona Cardinals, who, by the way, the Arizona Cardinals, bottom 5 run defense, last week against Kyren Williams, who we were talking about earlier, allowed him to rush for 7.9 yards per attempt and 158 total yards, a career game for him, one of the best rushing games the Rams have had in a while against this exact defense in the Cardinals. Now, running backs in similar spots this year average over 16 fantasy points per game. And as a 3-point favorite in his career when he's the starter, Kenneth Walker averages around 15 fantasy points per game, but this is an above average spot. That's what he's done in his average situations. This Cardinals defense well below average. So he's rising up the rankings for this week, but the devil's advocate would be, look at his remaining schedule. He has matchups coming up against the Browns, the Seahawks. You scroll a little bit more, you get matchups against the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers again. 5 out of his next basically 8 games, including some games in the fantasy playoffs like the 49ers. You have the Titans down here as well, the Eagles. This is a pretty brutal schedule the following couple of months. So that is indeed true. Maybe after a big game this week, you start to say, hey, can we sell high on him? But I personally think he's a top 15 player the rest of the season and that he can overcome some of these difficult matchups. Now, a player who just overcame a difficult matchup was Breece Hall. After what he did in week 6, he is now trending to be a workhorse running back, and we saw so good usage this past week. Breece Hall goes out there, and yet again, his snaps continue to increase, a season high 68% of the snaps. That's running back one usage. He sees 63% of of the rush attempts, but more importantly, look at the far right column. 60% of the routes run. It was a season high. It was double than what he saw last week. Basically, previous weeks, Michael Carter was running a lot of the routes. This week, we saw more Breece Hall there. And if he's going to start to see the passing down usage, that gives him a strong floor and a ceiling, and that's exactly what we saw this past week. Because Breece Hall wasn't great on the ground in a difficult matchup against the Eagles' stud defensive line. He only had 39 yards on 12 carries, but look at this. He catches all 5 of his targets because he ran more routes, 54 receiving yards, so he goes over 10 fantasy points in the air. He actually had more points as a receiver in this game than a rusher, and that's despite scoring a rushing touchdown in this one. So 20 fantasy points in a brutal matchup because he got that security blanket, the cheat code like we talk about on this channel, in the targets to get him there. And this is what made Breece Hall so deadly last year. In 5 of his 6 games before injury, he had at least 2 catches in all those games, and in 2 of those games, he had 6 receptions. It's what gives him a great floor, and we're starting to see that same trend this year. As you can see, his last 3 games here, he's had 3 receptions, 5 receptions. This has led to some of his best days of the season and in his career. And it's only going to get better because now Breece Hall, who already looks healthy, is going to get an extra week of rest in the bye week. When he comes out, don't be shocked if he's seeing 75 to 80% of the snaps. In last season, when he was seeing that type of usage, 70% of the snaps or close to it, he averaged 21.7 opportunities and 132 total yards. Now that sample was on 3 games, and in those games, he finished as the running back 15, the running back 6, and the running back 4. This fella's schedule is fantastic after the bye week. A bottom 5 Giants run defense, a bottom 5 Chargers run defense, a bottom half of the league Raiders defense. You could even scroll a little bit more and you find beneficial matchups against the Dolphins where a lot of points should be scored at home. You can see like a 6 reception game for him there. So Breece Hall is a top 24 running back the rest of the season. And this next running back we're going to talk about is inching close to that as well. But before we get there, 66% of people who watch these videos aren't subscribed. If you're one of those, it takes 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and it helps me out and allows you to see all my future uploads. Now that running back who's inching towards being a top 24 overall player the rest of the season is DeAndre Swift, because he's continuing to rise after producing, but this past week we saw him do it in a completely different way. Because what if I told you DeAndre Swift was just the running back 7 on the week, even though he only had 18 rushing yards, only 10 attempts, and didn't score a rushing touchdown? Well, you might be confused until you look at what he did. He had 10 targets, by far a season high, the most of any running back with Jalen Hurts in his career, 8 receptions, 40 yards, a touchdown. We just talked about Breece Hall, the receiving game, giving him a floor and a ceiling. That's exactly what we saw in a difficult matchup against the Jets on the opposite side of that game with DeAndre Swift, who goes out there in this one and literally puts up 20 fantasy points or close to it just in the air as a receiver alone. And this speaks volumes because usually Nick Sirianni puts Kenneth Gainwell in this role as the receiver, but it was DeAndre Swift here. And Miles Sanders last year in this offense never topped 3 receptions in a game. And now you're starting to see how good DeAndre Swift is in this offense, which is a good offense behind this solid offensive line. He's 5th in rushing yards, 4th in receptions, and this is taking into account that he basically didn't play week 1 when Kenneth Gainwell was the lead back. Now, since he took over in week 2 on Thursday Night Football when Kenneth Gainwell was hurt, he's played 63% of the snaps and has averaged over 5 yards per touch. He's always been efficient, and that's been continuing. Now, the next player I want to talk about who's rising up the rankings slightly, but this can happen a lot more quickly depending on these next few games, is the rookie in Seattle, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver first-round pick. Because we saw some more usage very quietly for JSN after the bye week, which is something that's common. You get more usage out of the rookies after the bye. They implement them more into the game plan. As you can see here on Fantasy Life, our official data partner, his snaps have been increasing, or his route participation as well, the past 4 games, and in week 6 after the bye, a season high 81% of the routes run. This led to 14% of the targets, which in this game was 5 targets. He's now seeing 5 or more targets in back-to-back games, and he's only seeing his usage, snaps, and routes increase the past month. And just as a reminder, once this guy starts seeing more usage, especially downfield usage, it could be fireworks, because this is what he did in college, playing next to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, some of the best young receivers in the NFL. He put up over 1,600 yards, 95 catches, and earned 23% of the targets, leading this team. He was the best receiver out of all 3 of those guys. Now, although the underlying usage has improved, there are still some concerns. Because on the season, JSN's average target distance, his ADOT, is just 4.1 yards downfield. And now that's good to get some easy receptions for PPR, but it's really difficult to have explosive plays off of that because, look, you're just not being targeted downfield. But the good news is last week when he saw more usage, his average target was nearly double this season average. It was around 7.5 yards downfield. We want to see that continue and even improve. But the main concern continues for JSN, and it's that he's behind these 2 stud receivers who have been having solid years. DK Metcalf has been having a great year despite playing with an injury the entire time. But like we just said, we've seen JSN compete in a loaded wide receiver room with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and still be able to come out on top. So there's a chance here that he can still earn good targets. Now, there's no crazy hot take like JSN's going to finish as a top 20 wide receiver. It's just seeing the usage change, the underlying usage. It's at least worth now saying, hey, this is a guy that I didn't really want on my roster a week or 2 ago, but now you should be trying to add him. And you won't be able to add Zay Flowers, and we told you to trade for him last week, but after a solid week 6, it might be harder to do so, but I'm going to continue to say this. He's a top 24 receiver the rest of the season. You might want to get him. Because in week 7 in London, where usually wide receivers and passing offense don't translate all that well, having to travel, you see a nice game for him. Yet again, he sees a solid target share, 8 targets in this game, 17 fantasy points, finds the end zone, was used as well on a 2-point conversion. I mean, everything here continues to be solid for Zay Flowers, the wide receiver 1 by a mile on this Baltimore team. And those 8 targets accounted for 28% of the overall pie. So a 28% target share for Zay Flowers. Now, every single game except for one, he's crossed at least 25% of the targets for this team. That is elite wide receiver 1 usage, and it's translated right here, as you can see. The 15th most targets in the NFL, 13th in target share, and 29% of the team's targets this year. Like I said, Rashad Bateman's not in the works here for the wide receiver 1. It's nowhere near Odell Beckham Jr., and Zay Flowers is currently overtaking even Mark Andrews as the favorite target for Lamar Jackson. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what's happening the past 5 to 6 weeks of the year. So now you're already getting him to be a top 25 wide receiver right now in fantasy, and he continues to see the cheat code targets. Flowers has 8 deep targets on the year and 7 red zone targets. So these 15 total cheat code targets, the red zones that lead to touchdowns, the deep targets that lead to big plays, that ranks top 8 amongst wide receivers this season. And honestly, his schedule is only going to get better. Look at his next 2 matchups. You have the Cardinals and Seahawks, 2 bottom 5 secondaries, and you keep going, and it looks really good. The Bengals, Chargers, and Rams, bottom 10 secondaries. Now you start to get to the fantasy playoffs, where he'll face the Jaguars, bottom 10 secondary, and the Dolphins at home, which could lead to a lot of points in that one. This is a nice spot, which would be the fantasy championship week as well. So Flowers continues to be a rookie worth targeting in trades, but this next guy's the ultimate buy low guy that you need to do it right now this week. And that's the Rams wide receiver Puka Nacua, who a month ago nobody would have traded you this guy, but then Cooper Kupp returns, and now some people are starting to question after his worst week of the season if Puka is still that dude. Because in this past game, he puts up just 6.6 fantasy points. And if you play in a half PPR league, this was just 4.6 fantasy points. Look, it's not good. 4 catches, 26 yards in a good matchup against a bottom 3 secondary in Arizona. You were expecting a lot more here. But here's the thing, the underlying usage for Puka Nacua was still great. In this game, those 7 targets actually accounted for 26% of the team's targets. 26% target share is fantastic. It's borderline elite. And now through 2 games, even though Cooper Kupp has returned in weeks 5 and week 6, Puka Nacua has ran 100% of the routes. He's not leaving the field. And in these 2 games, he's accounted for 29% of his team's targets. That would have ranked top 10 amongst all receivers last year. So everything is still great for Nacua. What was the reason for this bad game? Well, it's pretty straightforward here. The Rams only threw the ball 24 times in this game. On average, entering this game, they were throwing more than 37 times a game. Why did they only throw 24 times? Well, the second half, they were able to run the ball nonstop. They ran 9 straight times at one point. Kyren Williams averaged 8 yards per clip, 158 yards. Like we talked about earlier against the Cardinals, they just didn't have to throw the ball. So once Matt Stafford gets back to his normal volume of 35 to 40 plus pass attempts, Puka Nacua will see those 10 target games and do a lot more with them. And by the way, he just missed a touchdown on a diving grab or opportunity to have a touchdown in this game. So expect more passing volume from Stafford moving forward. Go get Puka Nacua, who faces a bottom 10 Steelers secondary this week. And now I'm also pretty intrigued by this next running back, a rookie who's rising up the ranks. And that would be Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's rising up the ranks for a pretty obvious reason. David Montgomery is dealing with a rib injury. It's a pain tolerance thing, no fracture, but he's going to miss some time. As you can see right here, a doctor on Twitter, and Jeff Mueller, you should follow him. He says David Montgomery is expected to miss some times. Cam Akers dealt with a similar injury in 2020, and he missed 2 games. It's basically just how much pain can you take? As a running back getting tackled on those ribs, it's probably a good thing to take a couple weeks off. Now, the issue is Jahmyr Gibbs is dealing with a hamstring injury that's kept him out the past 2 games. He didn't practice at all last week, but the recent reports are saying that he should be optimistic to play this week. And now we actually have a sample of what Jahmyr Gibbs can do when David Montgomery doesn't play. In week 3 against Atlanta, he had a game where he saw all the opportunities, over 60% of the snaps, 18 touches, 82 yards. In real life, this, 4.5 yards per touch is solid, but 9.2 fantasy points to running back, 24 in the week. It leaves a lot to be desired. Now, the upside for Gibbs comes from obviously what he can do this week, but even in future weeks if Montgomery was to miss 2 to 3 games. Because he's been fairly efficient on his touches, his limited touches this season, but he does have a difficult matchup on the road against the Ravens this week. But if you look ahead from there, a nice matchup at home against the Raiders, then they hit a bye week, which is probably when David Montgomery comes back after the bye week, but this would be the time for Gibbs to earn more opportunities, because then after the bye week, matchup against a bottom 5 Chargers run defense, matchup against a bottom 5 Bears run defense, matchup against a bottom 10 Packers run defense. And typically later in the season is when we see these rookies come on. That's exactly what we saw in Alvin Kamara's rookie season, a guy who's compared closely to Jahmyr Gibbs. So these are his 2 weeks with Montgomery out to earn some more work in the future. So it's important to track his hamstring status heading into week 7, but if he plays, this is a big opportunity for him and his fantasy owners. Now, the next man up is Michael Pittman, somebody who I've been saying you should buy low on after his last 2 subpar to average games. Well, he got back on track in week 7 with Gardner Minshew as his QB. And he had arguably his best game of the season, a season high 14 targets, goes over 100 yards, 9 grabs, a pretty efficient day from Gardner Minshew when targeting Michael Pittman here. And this was against a bad Jags defense that he's now torn up twice this year, but it was good to see him get back on track. And now pretty quietly this season, he ranks 4th in total targets. He also ranks 4th in wide receiver usage, how often he's being used in different formations, in the red zone, downfield, as well as his total volume. And his 28% target share is elite. So nobody really views Michael Pittman as an elite receiver. So far, under new head coach Shane Steichen this season, he's been just that. And his role has been evolving. Over his first 3 games, his average target was just 5 yards downfield, which is good for a guy who can get yards after the catch like Pittman, but it doesn't give you the big explosive plays downfield. But as you can see right here, over his last 3 weeks, his ADOT, his average depth of target, it's been 21 yards. That was with Anthony Richardson. But then the last 2 weeks, which is a more stable number here with Gardner Minshew, 10 yards and 11 yards. When you're seeing these targets 10 to 11 yards downfield on average, that's exactly the sweet spot for still having highly convertible and catchable targets, but big plays can come off of them. So you're getting Michael Pittman basically never leaving the field. Like we said, 4th in targets. Look at this right here. He's 2nd in routes run, but he's only 19th in fantasy points. More touchdowns will come, more big games will come from him. So people don't view him as like this top 10 receiver for fantasy, but that's basically what he's being used as right now. So target Pittman in trades if you still can. It might be more difficult, and also target this next asset. This one is not as difficult to acquire. It's the fantasy blueprint that over 4,000 people are currently using to win their matchups this week, make their fantasy playoffs, and take home a championship. This is what you, the beautiful person, get. Every day of the week, I send you this right here, a tool to help you win your matchup. Do just that, smack around your league mates, whether it's the waiver wire tiers, rest of season rankings, projections rankings, game-by-game matchup notes, every single thing you need to win your week. And here's an example, a snippet from the game-by-game matchup notes. This is filtered by wide receivers from a previous week. You can see right here, every single thing you need to know for the wide receiver, what they've done that season, where their usage is downfield, how often they're catching their passes, their specific wide receiver cornerback matchup, how good that cornerback has been, how bad he's been, what the pound and speed advantages for the wide receiver. This is just for the wide receivers. You get similar data for every other position. And that's just for the game-by-game notes. And now this is extremely simple to acquire. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And here's the thing. These are the 2 steps that you'll follow, and it's just $5 for the rest of the season, the entire season. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund that $5. If you had a player who gets injured, knock on wood that they don't, it doesn't matter. You get your $5 right back. This is risk-free, so go ahead and get it. And to get access to that blueprint, a reminder, just scan the QR code on the screen and join the thousands of others who have it, or click the link in the description below. Now, the next man rising up the rankings is coming off of a season high in usage, and that is the Raiders' 2nd-round rookie tight end Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. Here's what he did in week 6. Mayer goes out there and he runs a season high 67% of the routes, and look at this, earns a very respectable, a great for a rookie tight end, 21% of the targets. This led to a strong day. And here's what that day looked like, and not the easiest of matchups against the New England Patriots, but he goes out there and on 6 targets, he puts up 75 receiving yards. He was targeted 3 times on the opening drives where, you know, they're going to have scripted plays, so it was clear that they wanted to get him involved. Now, Mayer was the Raiders' 2nd-round pick, like we said, and he was thought to be the best tight end in this draft class by many people. And it's because he was dominant in college at Notre Dame. He was able to block, but he was an elite receiver. Look at this. His final 2 years of college, 99 targets, 105 targets. That's 8.5 targets per game. For a tight end, that's insane, and it's reflected in his target shares. 22% great, 31% target share for a receiver would be elite. This dude's a tight end. Now, to start his NFL career, he was blocking a lot more, but the past 2 games, he's been used more as a receiver, seeing 11 targets during that time. And here's the good news for Michael Mayer. He's going to come into this week against the Bears, bottom 5 secondary. And oh yeah, by the way, if you don't know now, you know, they allowed the 2nd most receptions to the tight end position. He is easily rising up the rankings. If he's available on your waivers, drop a guy like Dalton Kincaid, drop a guy like Cole Kmet, and pick this dude up. And now you also want to pick up this next guy who's available in like 65% of leagues. And if you can't pick him up, try and buy low on him. And that's the Chiefs rookie wide receiver, 2nd-round pick out of SMU, and Rashee Rice. Look, he just continues to be insanely efficient. Now on the season, he ranks top 11, and he's actually top 5 if you factor out all the guys with smaller samples in yards per route run, averaging 2.82 yards per route run. Last season, this would have ranked 4th amongst the entire season of wide receivers. And he's coming off of a solid game on Thursday Night Football. Yes, it was a good matchup against the Broncos, but he led all the wide receivers in this game for the Chiefs with 72 receiving yards on 4 targets, caught all 4 of them. He's now had back-to-back solid games. Basically, every time he's seen a decent amount of routes, he has had a good game. In this past week, he was used for the first time this year as a top 3 receiver in the offense. And here's the proof of that. As you can see, MVS led the team in routes and snaps, but then after that, Sky Moore just 3 more snaps than Rashee Rice, who had 34. Rashee Rice, 22 routes run, just 1 behind Sky Moore. He was a top 3 receiver, and part of this is because of the success he's having. They're giving him more opportunities, but the other is because Justin Watson right here, as you can see, usually plays a lot of snaps and runs a lot of routes. Only played 28 snaps in this game, 18 routes because he got hurt, dislocated his elbow. He's going to miss time. And the long story short out of everything I just threw at you there is that Rashee Rice is now going to get more opportunities, and he has a really good upcoming schedule. Here's the Chiefs' next 3 games. A matchup against the Chargers, bottom 5 secondary, the Broncos, bottom 5 secondary, and then a home game against the Dolphins that might have the highest team total or game total on the entire year. Let's say close to 60 points. A lot of points scored in that. If Rashee Rice is earning opportunities, he'll be involved. So he's somebody I'm looking to get, and so is this next elite running back who's about to be the workhorse once again. And that fella I'm talking about is Jonathan Taylor, who saw his snaps increase a decent amount. He only had 16% of the snaps in his return 2 weeks ago, but this past week that increased. And it increased pretty significantly. Look at this. He goes from 15% of the snaps to 43%, and his rush attempts only 18% in his debut week 5. Week 6 sees the majority of the rush attempts, 53 rush attempts, and it's only going to continue as they get his legs back under him. This week I'm expecting him to see over 60% of the rush attempts, over 55 to 60% of the snaps, and be the workhorse running back once again in this offense. And now we also know that Anthony Richardson is going to be done for the season with this shoulder surgery, so the reasons why we didn't like Jonathan Taylor when the season started, he had a contract dispute, that's no longer there, and he had a mobile quarterback who would steal rushing touchdowns and not target him as much. Well, now that's no longer a problem. So we're about to get Jonathan Taylor taking over the 20 plus opportunities a game that Zach Moss has been seeing with a less mobile quarterback in Gardner Minshew, who just targeted him 6 times last week. That's good news. I'm pretty confident in saying that after this next week, it's going to be your last time to probably buy low on Jonathan Taylor. Now I want to talk about some quick hitters. Devin Singletary is somebody who's rising up the rankings because after the game, when he led the backfield in usage, especially in the fourth quarter, the most important time of the game, over Dameon Pierce, his head coach said yes. The reason for that was the more involvement of Devin Singletary in a split backfield. Expect him to see touches moving forward. Then we must talk about Travis Etienne, who is now a top 10 player the rest of the season in our rest of season rankings in the fantasy blueprint. Like we said, link down below, go ahead and get it because he just had another big game. 2 more touchdowns for this fella, another 20 plus point day, just casually goes out there and has 21 touches in this one. He is absolutely fantastic right now. And now speaking of guys who have been quietly great, I want to talk about a rookie in the Giants receiving corps. And this would be Jalen Hyatt, who, look at this, over the last 4 games, his routes have been increasing. 59%, that's good. 60%, that's good. But in week 6, with Tyrod Taylor as his quarterback in a big game in prime time against the Bills, he runs 80% of the routes. Now, he only earns 13% of the targets, but this is his game. He's probably only going to see 4 or 5 targets a game. A lot of them will be downfield on average, like 15 yards, and it will lead to some big plays this season. It's something to make note of and maybe a player to add, especially in deeper leagues. And then as we talked about Travis Etienne, how great he's been, you now have 3 fantastic weeks of Alvin Kamara if you waited him out from his 3-game suspension. Look at this. This dude has just been fantastic. 27 opportunities in this game, catches 7 more balls in this one, and 26 touches. It doesn't even matter that he's not been efficient, that he had 26 touches and didn't clear 100 yards, because he's just been dynamic with his ability to earn touches. Even if Jamal Williams come back, it won't matter. So these are the players who are skyrocketing up the rankings heading into this week and the rest of the season. Some way, somehow you want them on your squad. And now there are some players in the league that you don't want on your squad. Maybe they're good, but you just want to get ultimate value for them in trades. And this video right here will show you exactly who you need to be trading away before week 7. And look, here's the deal. If you made it to the end of the video, you should be subscribed to the channel, but 66% of people aren't, so maybe you just don't know. It takes 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button. It helps me out as we push towards 100,000 subscribers, but also it will allow you to see all of my future uploads.